It's time to get the inside info on BYU with Cougar insider Mitch Harper of KSLSports.com on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
All right, everybody, welcome back. That's right. It's that time of the show for us to bring in our guy, Mitch Harper. Mitch, it's been a rough couple of weeks for the Cougs on the basketball court, but a much-needed win last night in Waco at Baylor. I could tell, right? We're watching this thing as soon as it tipped off in the studio here, and Baylor smelled blood in the water. They went right after them, and BYU had its signature down double digits in the first half. But unlike some of the other moments that they've had recently, they whittled that thing down before the half, and then it wasn't the comeback story the entire second half for BYU. How big of a deal was it for them to not just get that win, but for the Big Three to have 81 combined points down there at Baylor?
It was important just to get back in that win column, because I think that now with the schedule, how it's set up, they probably should get a second straight win this Saturday against Colorado. And then I think it sets up an opportunity next week, a week from now, to go into Tucson and just play loose and play comfortable and just try to be as open-minded to an upset as you possibly can be going against Arizona. So it was needed. And I think the defense is still an issue for this BYU team, but you got some valuable contributions from Kennard Davis, who gave you some a nice offensive rebound with an and one late in that game. Hadim Boop off the bench. I thought his defense was something of note in that game, and he got 10 rebounds. So you got some contributions along with the Big Three. And I think BYU just reminded all of us that this is a team that, even though they're sliding a little bit after facing that gauntlet of a stretch in the Big 12, they still will be a tough out for anyone that they face. If they're a 6-11, seed, a 6 seed, that 3 seed, whoever that is, probably won't want to face an AJ DeBonsa and Richie Saunders and Rob Wright, because the firepower of this group, having 3 guys that can get you any 80 points on any night, that's something that very few, if any, can boast in this college basketball landscape this season. So it was a critical win for this team.
Good, solid win for BYU, a win they had to have in a tough place to play. It's not easy to go win at Baylor. I don't care what year it is. That was a good win. And your Big Three score 81 points. But, Mitch, my concern is 81 of your 99 points come from 3 guys. You're still not seeing the production that you're going to need from multiple guys other than those 3. How concerning is that moving forward? Is that sustainable?
It's definitely concerning, but, it's February 11th, and that's just what it is with this BYU team. It's going to be the Big Three. They need to score at least 75 points or more every single night. And on top of that, we're probably looking at a world where AJ DeBonsa and Rob Wright have to play all 40 minutes as they did last night.
Wow.
Because the bench is non-existent for this BYU team. I think Hadim Boop, again, can be someone that you can turn to consistently. I think that Kennard Davis, if he can give you the contributions that he did last night, that's valuable, because he's always going to get open looks. And if he can knock down 2 or 3 3-pointers per game, that would be huge for BYU. But you go through this bench, I think Bidu Ahmed, the former G League player, I thought last night wasn't the right matchup, and I think that's what helped BYU with Boop coming off the bench. Thought it was a good matchup for him, but I think Bidu, at times, he can be a good rim protector in relief of Keba Keita. Mihailo Boskovic, he's always willing to fire up a 3, but outside of that, there's just nothing that you can really count on night after night from this bench. It's the top 3, the Big Three, and then you just hope that, some of the other guys perform. But I just think that's what it is with this team. And the thing is that a lot of college basketball teams, with their roster and revenue sharing, you're kind of seeing a lot of teams, Texas Tech, Houston, Baylor, they're pretty much playing 6 or 7-man rotations, if that, because they allocated a lot of resources to the top end of their roster, and BYU is in that same boat. You're going to go with the guys that you're paid the premium for, and that's AJ DeBonsa, Richie Saunders, and Rob Wright. They got to carry you, and they got to stay healthy, and that's the key, because there's still a lot of tough games ahead. But I just think that's kind of what it is for this BYU team. You can't expect much from this bench at this point.
I don't mean to totally single him out, but I think it's just that bigger problem of the defensive side of things. Keba Keita is one of those guys that at the beginning of the year had that, he's on the Naismith Defensive Player of the Year watch list. And, now I think about a game last night, it seems to be kind of what we've seen out of this team. I just don't know where the defense has gone or the comfortability. It just looks like he's not as comfortable and as loose playing Keba Keita right now. I don't know where that production has gone. And so not even from the offensive side, because, he's good to give you 8-10 points a game usually. And he'll rebound, but he hasn't been doing much of either. And then the blocks don't really come at the pace that they used to come for him. So what's Keba Keita's deal this year?
It has been a little bit concerning the past few games, especially that Houston game where he was 1 of 6 from the field, because he's one of the all-time best field goal shooters in BYU history, because when he puts up a shot, it's going to be a high percentage look, and it's always around the rim. I think one of the big things too with Keba Keita's maybe not as great of an impact, at least in the offensive end, and at times defensively. Offensively, the spacing sometimes isn't as open as what we saw last year with Yegor Dielman. This year, Rob Wright's a paint-touching guard where he's going to slither into the paint, and he's going to kind of occupy that space. You're not seeing as many alley-oops like you saw with Yegor Dielman or Dallin Hall a season ago to Keba Keita. We haven't seen that as often. And then Keita too, he had an injury earlier in the year. He had some illnesses. It's been some up and down availability for him. But he's got to get right, because when you talk about the rim protection, that's his strength. And he had a few blocks last night, but it's got to go to a higher level, I think, against the great teams, because right now BYU's 6 wins against Big 12 competition, they've all come against teams that are in the bottom 9 of the league. And, 3 of those wins are against the bottom 2 teams in Utah and Kansas State. So there's not a signature win yet. Last night was the first quad 1 victory in 2 months since the victory over Clemson. But, Keba Keita's got to be important for this BYU team, because when he brings that intensity on the defensive end, it just does so much for this BYU team, because you can't ask AJ for what he gives every single night on the offensive end. There's going to be a little bit of sacrificing on the defensive side. That's where Keba Keita can pick up the slack. A 3-and-D guy like a Kennard Davis picks up the slack on the defensive side, because so much is asked on the offensive end from BYU's big 3, in particular AJ DeBonsa.
Rob Wright had a great night last night in his return to Baylor. I know that was a big night for him. I know there was a lot of energy in that building directed towards him. How do you think he handled all that, and what did he say after the game about it?
It was his best game as a BYU player, because this BYU team in Big 12 play, they've turned the ball over a lot. You go back a week ago against Oklahoma State, he and AJ DeBonsa combined for 10 turnovers between the 2 of them. Rob had 5 and AJ had 5. Last night against Baylor, only 2 turnovers, one of which was late. That kind of kept Baylor a little bit within striking distance. But I thought he had great composure, and I thought great decision-making. Now, Baylor's not great at generating turnovers, but I thought that, Rob Wright did a good job of taking care of the basketball, and he was efficient too, and he was attacking and getting to the hoop, because, again, that's where he is at his best, getting into the paint, attacking the rim, and finishing. He's had so many shots around the rim this year that just miss. I'd have to go and count the missed layups or missed bunnies from Rob Wright. There's been many where his scoring totals could be a lot higher this season, but he was efficient last night. And I got to think that playing his former program, going up against Scott Drew, who said leading up to that game, yeah, players come and go, but you wish they wouldn't leave after signing a contract. Scott Drew put that out there. There was probably a little bit extra intensity. Rob Wright's a man of few words in these post-game pressers, and he kind of kept that calling card in this one. But even Kevin Young said that the Baylor fans were pretty classy, as he put it. And that's maybe a low bar when having a BYU game, considering BYU walks into some buzzsaws when it comes to chance. But Baylor fans were pretty classy, even to the point where you heard a lot of BYU fans making their presence felt in that gym that only holds 7,500. So it was a good night all around, I think, for BYU.
Well, Baylor fans just didn't want to get fined.
They're all you guys. I mean, I love how there's like a thing at every game now. They like have somebody. It was like some coaches. It was some like athletic directors. Now they're like trying to bring back like celebrities that are like from those schools. Are all. And I just want to remind everybody when BYU comes here, let's not embarrass ourselves. All right, let's stand up for Baylor. And you're like, oh my gosh, like what is going on?
Every team has a celebrity BYU apologist that has to say something before the game. Please don't say anything bad about the LDS Church.
You can't. You don't
want to get fined tonight.
It's like every other. I would imagine that people are like wondering after every game, Mitch. They're like, I wonder if Mitch is going to write a blank BYU article after this one because I think I heard it. I think I may have heard it, and it's like, oh, not another one. All right, facing the team right now is maybe some. They got this Colorado game to maybe get right a little bit. And they do. The rest of conference play, I mean, none of these games are going to be gimmies or easy. A lot of them have a lot of folks who are ranked, and it's still going to be difficult. How can they – obviously winning at Arizona is like that's a tall ask. But what about the ones that along the way get them to the spot where people go, okay, now they're back to what we think is a team that could be a Sweet 16 or Elite 8 team?
I think BYU could finish 6-1 in the final 7.
Wow.
I think that the game that will be the must win to get a signature victory for BYU is going to be Iowa State. Saw last night Iowa State lost to TCU. Iowa State's kind of been up and down with their offense, and maybe the perfect cure for offensive woes is facing BYU, but I think that BYU can put up a lot of points. And I think, being in the Marriott Center, BYU's had Iowa State's number. Whether it was Mark Pope or Kevin Young last year, they swept the Cyclones a season ago in Ames and Kansas City. I think that's a winnable game, even though Iowa State has at times looked really good, and defensively, they're one of the best in the country. There's going to be tough games at West Virginia and Cincinnati. Cincinnati, despite their issues, they're one of the top 10 defenses in college basketball, and then Texas Tech to close out the regular season. But I think there is a path to going 6-1 because 4 of the last 7 are at the Marriott Center. You like that setup. That Arizona game, that's just, to me, an automatic L. I'd be really stunned if they won that game. But I think BYU, if they could go 6-1 somehow, and that's a real optimistic outlook, but I think it could be done, then you're getting into that protected seed territory at the 4 seed line. And I think for BYU, that's critical because if you get into the top 16 seeds, you're not allowing the committee to entertain the dropping a seed line because of no Sunday play. You're protected with one of those seeds where you slide them into Portland as a 4 seed or a 3 seed, whatever that looks like. Whereas if you get outside that top 16, say you're a 5 seed, you might drop to a 6 or a 7 because you got to factor in BYU into the Sunday conversation, and you're not going to give them priority over a 3 seed or a 4 seed. So it's important for BYU to climb the seed lines again. Right now, they're pretty much 5 or a 6 seed, depending on what brackets you look at. But there's opportunities to get quad 1 victories. You got 5 quad 1 games remaining as of now. And I think, outside of the Arizona game, if BYU's big 3 show up like they did last night, they could take down anyone outside of Arizona remaining on the schedule.
No, you're right. I'm looking at it. I think you're absolutely right. It's not going to be easy, but 6-1 is definitely possible with having Iowa State and Texas Tech at home. It'd be really tough to think that they could win in Tucson against that juggernaut that is Arizona. And 6-1 puts BYU in a really good spot at the end of the season with some quality wins. And it would put A.J. DeBonsa in a really good spot. It's interesting. You have the contrast of Darren Peterson sitting out games while DeBonsa's playing 40 minutes and giving it everything he's got. I think he's earning a lot of respect, not just in the college basketball world, but with the NBA. What is playing like this many minutes doing for him in his future or award consideration? Because it's quite remarkable what he's doing with what's being asked of him with this team.
Well, I think what's been so impressive about AJ, I think that's caught maybe everyone a little bit by surprise. We saw signs of this during his time at Utah Prep, watching many of his games in his one season with them, but he really does want to get his teammates involved. He is willing to pass the ball and pass it at a high level. Last night, he had 7 assists. I mean, he will find the open guy, and he wants to get his teammates involved. Guy's got to knock down shots. I go back to the game at Kansas. He has only 1 assist. That wasn't an issue of him not passing the ball. It was simply guys weren't hitting 3-point shots when he was finding them. AJ will make his teammates better, and I think there's still a little bit of chemistry being developed. with this BYU team. I think the one missing piece for AJ to really get the momentum built for him as maybe I don't say a lock to be a number one pick, but to be viewed as the number one prospect is for him to have a 36-point game against one of the big dogs in the Big 12, because all these games, 43 against Utah, 36 against Baylor. Yes, it's Baylor and they've got NBA players with Yesufu and Carr, but to have a big game against someone that's viewed as one of the national title contenders. He did it kind of against UConn. It was primarily in the second half where he ended up with 25 points. But again, in the Big 12 play against the biggest teams, he's been kind of controlled a bit against Houston and against Kansas and Arizona. So that's going to be the thing for him, leading BYU to a big victory. I think that's where like an Iowa State, or if he somehow pulled off a massive upset at Arizona and had a big stat line, I think then you're starting to talk about him as a, number one guy. Because I think that Kansas game, it was the ultimate prospect matchup. And I think just when Darren Peterson was cooking the way that he was for that 7-minute stretch in the first half, and AJ wasn't responding, I think people made a lot of narrative conclusions in that moment. But AJ has been really tough. I think back to a game against TCU where he takes a hard fall on his right shoulder, and you could tell in that game it was bothering him, yet he didn't come out and he kept playing, and he played the next game with blue tape on that right shoulder against Texas Tech, which coincidentally was his lowest scoring output of 13 points this season. AJ's always there and he's available, and he's really kind of embraced BYU, which again, I think for Cougar fans, I think they were thinking a lot of, this 5-star player. BYU's never had a talent like this with so many accolades coming into the program. Will it just be all about him? It really hasn't, even though that he is a massive story every single time he touches the floor. He really is a guy that kind of fits at BYU, as crazy as that sounds, and it's worked quite well. And BYU, though, has got to make a run in the NCAA tournament to really maximize this opportunity to have a generational player like AJ DeBonsa.
Mitch, before we get you out here, I just want to ask you about, we had this discussion yesterday with Jonathan Tavernari about the top-end talent is unquestionable about how good these guys are at the very top, and the bench, as you alluded to, is not great in comparison. How does KY flip that narrative? Obviously, you just go, well, you recruit a lot of other guys. It's like, it's a little bit easier said than done. So how can he make that work? Because you're working into a time where you're going to see the best player in the history of BYU be here for 1 year and leave. A lot of other names, obviously Richie Saunders not going to be back. So how do they replace top-end talent, but also make sure that they don't just have 3 guys every year that are going to be the ones that you hang your hat on?
Well, when you look at next year, I mean, BYU's in the mix for Bruce Branch the third, who's viewed as possibly the number 1 draft pick in 2027. He took a visit to BYU, an official visit a couple of weeks ago, and BYU is in the thick of that recruiting battle. And if they got someone like him, you're talking about potentially another AJ type of guy at BYU, and you've got a good stable of young personnel. I think that some of the misevaluations have happened. I think Kevin Young is still learning about college basketball. I think he even saw that last night when it came to the way that he's choosing to call timeouts. I think he's still learning about going into road venues. You need to be strategic with your timeouts. I think when it comes to learning about college basketball, figuring out ways to build out rosters, and you can't just take the NBA approach to the college game when constructing a rosters. Some of these guys like a Tyler Murruss was viewed to step right in and be a lights out 3-point shooter. That hasn't happened at all. And then they had injuries with a Dawson Baker and Nate Pickens before the season. Those were massive losses that in the moment, I think we thought BYU will be okay because the rest of this bench is going to play out. But those injuries were huge. They do next year get the number 1 JUCO player in the country and KJ Perry to line up in the backcourt. I think Kevin Young, thing about him is like he'll figure out ways, whatever ends up happening this year with this team, I think he'll adjust and he will find ways to get the personnel necessary to find that sweet spot between a lot of depth. Like last year's team had 11 guys, but they didn't have maybe Richie was a superstar, but they didn't have much after him that you could rely on every single night, which is strange to say considering Yegor was on that team, but he was inconsistent in the college game. This year, it's more just the top 3. Finding that happy spot next year will kind of be the challenge for KY, but I'd be pretty confident that he figures that out. And I think he's still kind of learning kind of the ebbs and flows of college basketball. And he's been pretty candid about that too. And as he continues to learn on the job, he'll make the necessary adjustments. I think Kevin Young's the perfect fit at BYU to really identify personnel, build out rosters, and really enhance relationships. Because if you are a promising NBA draft prospect, what he's done with AJ shouldn't deter you. And same with Richie Saunders. The proof of concept is there that he's going to get you to the league. It's just now kind of finding that depth in the future to do that. And they've kind of got some pieces next year that would suggest they should be a little bit deeper, but we shall see.
Mitch Harper, he's our BYU insider for KSLSports.com. Mitch, as always, awesome to have you on. We appreciate it, and we'll chat with you again, man, pretty soon here.
You bet, guys. Take care.
There you go.
Mitch.
Mitch Harper.